We're so glad you could come for tonight's forum on responsible citizenship. How should a Catholic vote? That was meant to be kind of a provocative question. My name is Shawn Harris, and I'm the program manager for the Terrence J. Murphy Institute for Catholic Thought, Law, and Public Policy, a collaboration of the Center for Catholic Studies and the School of Law here at the University of St. Thomas. One of the goals of the Murphy Institute is to engage the public in rigorous discussions that bring the Catholic intellectual tradition to bear on current issues of law and policy. This year, the Murphy Institute introduced Hot Topics, Cool Talk, a unique series that explores the Catholic position and some challenging perspectives on current political issues in a context divorced from the heat of any political campaign. Each forum had 2 expert speakers, and we have 2 tonight. Some local and some national, respectfully engaging in a relevant, important, and often controversial topic. We kicked off the series with a debate on the Minnesota Marriage Amendment last October, and went on to cover embryo rights, stem cell research, health care reform, balancing the budget, immigration. We slipped in religious liberty and the contraception coverage mandate. Punishment theory, and tonight in our final capstone forum of this academic year, we will hear from 2 professors, a theologian and a philosopher, what principles we ought to consider when we head to the polls this fall, when they address the question, how should a Catholic vote? Let me tell you a little bit about the format that we've used and will use tonight. It's very simple. Each speaker will get 15 minutes to present, in this case both of them are his ideas. This is followed by 5 minutes to respond to each other's remarks. And during this time, we'll pass out an index card. I think I have this one. We're going green. This is one from the last forum. But write who you would like the question directed to and your question on it. And we'll collect that during the time that they're each commenting on each other's remarks. And then we will open it up to the Q&A session, which we'll have about 15 minutes for that, hopefully. The program will end at 8:10, and we'll just do a little wrap-up at that time, so you can leave at 8:15. I know students here have a lot of studying to do. You can grab a cookie. There'll be some coffee on the way out, or you can continue on the conversation in the lobby. The moderator of today's program is Patrick Harris. Pat Harris is Vice President of RBC Global Asset Management. And if you are from St. Paul, you may know Pat from his long history serving our community. He is the founder of Serving Our Troops, an all-volunteer effort which has completed 9 projects to provide dinner with the family for Minnesota National Guard members and families, serving over 75,000 steak dinners since 2004. But perhaps he is best known in these parts for the 12 years that he just completed serving on the St. Paul City Council representing the 3rd Ward. He has knocked the doors of this ward many times over, and he might have an idea of some of the questions that are on people's minds. He has been recognized with a host of awards for service, too numerous to name, really. It was kind of fun to go through his CV, which I've never seen before, but I'll just highlight a couple of them. One I actually was invited to the dinner for, and that was the Catholic Charities Lifetime of Service Award, and the other is the Civilian Service Award from the U.S. National Guard. Pat earned a BA from Marquette University in English, and an MBA from the University of Minnesota, Carlson School of Management. We are in good hands tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Shawn. Ms. Sullivan Harris. It is a distinct pleasure to be able to moderate this extremely timely and poignant discussion. I know that the past events have been very timely and have talked about very, very important issues in our community and in our nation. And I think tonight is no different. Religion is in politics everywhere, from presidential politics, and I can tell you firsthand, from presidential politics to potholes, it is everywhere in our community, and you can have many opinions on what you think of that, and we're going to talk about them tonight. So very excited to be here and to be part of this tonight. I'm also very excited that nobody's going to ask me about medians or potholes or anything like that. If you do, I'll refer them to these professors to my right, and they'll have great answers, I would imagine. Without further ado, I'm going to take the opportunity and introduce our positively and most distinguished speakers tonight, who are going to engage in a philosophical rumble, if you will, that I will moderate, and I'm very happy to do so. First, on my very far right, is Dr. Bernard Brady. Dr. Brady is a professor and department chair of the theology department at St. Thomas. He earned his BS from Loyola University in Chicago in theology and psychology, and his doctorate from the University of Chicago Divinity School. He joined the University of St. Thomas in 1989. In 2004, he was voted Who's Who among American teachers, and in 2005, he was awarded Professor of the Year right here at this university, and I think Dr. Langen's in the back, and Professor Brady is still looking for that large cash award, by the way. I'm sure it's on its way. He is the author of 3 books, Essential Catholic Social Thought, Christian Love, I think they're making a movie on that one, by the way, and Moral Band of Community, and he has 3 essays appearing in his forthcoming book, Voting with a Catholic Heart. So we're very honored here tonight to have Dr. Brady as part of our discussion, or part of our rumble, if you will. Dr. Stephen J. Haney is an associate professor of philosophy and has been teaching at the University of St. Thomas since 1987. He received his BA from the College of the Holy Cross and his PhD from Marquette University, I think that school's in Milwaukee somewhere, in 1988. I am a class of 1988 graduate of Marquette. In addition to teaching introductory courses, philosophy of the human person, and introductory ethics, he also teaches courses in contemporary social issues, political philosophy, and the thought of Thomas Aquinas. He is a senior fellow in the Murphy Institute. He is the author of the anthology entitled Abortion, A New Generation of Catholic Responses, published in the Human Life Review, Homiletic and Pastoral Review. The Thomist, I think I got that one right. I don't think they're making movies on any of these books, by the way. They might, one never knows. The Catholic Lawyer and the National Catholic Bioethics Quarterly, and he is a regular contributor to Public Discourse, the online journal of opinion for the Witherspoon Institute. He also occasionally publishes articles in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, the Pioneer Press, and moral issues of public importance such as abortion, stem cell research, sex and marriage, and voting. He speaks frequently on Catholic principles of voting, and probably most importantly, he was my TA for my logic class in 1984. And so I will say that it was a class that I remember, and there will be no informal fallacies of logic in this discussion, because I will call you out on argumentum ad hominem, argumentum ad misericordiam, and all those other things. So, so without further ado, I would like to invite our speakers. As Ms. Sullivan-Harris indicated, our format tonight will be 15 minutes per professor with 5 minutes per professor of response. So without further ado, my old professor, actually I don't know if he was a professor then, he was just a TA.
Just a guy.
And I was the guy in the back sleeping, and no, I was there, I remembered. And without further ado, let me give you Dr. Stephen Haney.
Thanks very much. Well, you know, we don't have a lot of time, so I'm just going to dig right in here. Hold on, I need my clicker. Where's my clicker thing? Where did I put my clicker? Oh, there it is, right in front of me. Okay. See, you remember those days, right, where I couldn't find anything. All right. So we're talking about voting, and so the first question is, what is the meaning of a vote? Well, vote basically is a yes or a no, right? An acceptance or a rejection of a proposed state of affairs. Thank you. Voting is a moral act. Okay, it's an act of conscience, and this means that we have to ask what the right reasons are for voting. You know, what's the right thing to vote for? In a community election, anything from local to national community, it doesn't matter, we are voting on people and policies that affect everyone. And in those kinds of elections, I must act for the common good. That is, for the good of the whole community, and not just my own self-interest. And since my vote is an act of my conscience, I must act according to what I believe the common good is. That is, according to my vision of what a properly human society, government, and laws should be. Now, there are different kinds of votes that you might cast in an election, right? I can vote directly on a law, all right, and we have that coming up this year. I can vote for a person to represent us as a maker or enforcer of the law. Therefore, I have to be able to approve or at least accept, under the circumstances, the proposed law, or I must be able to approve or at least accept, under the circumstances, the candidate's vision of the common good. Now, voting, therefore, is always an act of cooperation in the acts of others. That means that I am morally implicated in their acts when I know their intentions beforehand. When I vote directly on a law, I authorize citizens to perform certain acts. All right? And if they're authorized to do bad things and I know this, then I'm implicated in this. I'm implicated in their evil. When I vote for a representative, same thing, right? I authorize him to bring about his vision of reality. Okay, the one that he's proposed, or at least the one that his previous actions indicate that he will attempt. This isn't to say that I like what the lawmaker proposes. Rather, my vote says that what he proposes is something that I am permitted to accept under the circumstances. If I know what he proposes is evil, I may be implicated in this evil if I do not have sufficient justification for accepting the risk that he will succeed in his proposal. Obviously, then, I should be looking for candidates for office at all levels who embody best my own commitments to the common good, my own vision of society, law, and government. Catholic social teaching has a very well-specified vision of these things. Insofar as I am a Catholic, I should be informing my conscience with that teaching and living in accordance with it. But the Church's vision of society and law and government is a natural law vision, which does not require revelation but is discoverable by reason. That means everyone's conscience should be formed according to the natural law, if it is in fact true. Now let me talk a little bit, start there, and talk a little bit about law, because this will help down the road a little bit. What is law? Law, and you just got these four little pieces in the classical definition of a law. Law is, first of all, a dictate of practical reason. Okay? It has to be promulgated, that is, they have to tell you what the law is, or else you can't follow it. It has to be promulgated by the person who has authority. Okay? And that authority can be either the community as a whole, when we're all voting on in a plebiscite of some sort, or its representative, the person we put in office. Okay? And that person has the authority to care for what? To care for the common good. Okay? And that is, what is the common good? The common good is the good of the whole community. It's not necessarily the good of individuals, right? Now, what should we be shooting for here? True flourishing of human beings is not found in material possessions. It is rather the ability to reach our proper ends, which are naturally good for us. What goes against these ends, or goods, is unfitting for us and must be avoided. Civil laws will only make sense. That is, they'll be dictates of practical reason, and thus be properly recognized as law, insofar as they do not attack these ends. If they attack these ends, they're attacking the common good. They're attacking the good of the person that they're meant to serve, okay? So actions and laws are fitting or unfitting for us, not in their results, not in what people end up doing, but in their relationship to this truth about human beings and to the human dignity of both the one who acts and the one who is acted upon. So what is the minimum that we can expect from the state? Minimum the state has to do to fulfill its role. It may never support violations of the moral law by anyone. It may occasionally permit some violations for proportionately grave reasons, but it can never support them. And it may never even permit violations of fundamental justice. And we'll talk about that soon. Human beings are the reason for the existence of the state. At the very least, then, the state must attempt to protect us from violations of those fundamental rights without which we cannot move toward our proper ends as persons. Now, what are those rights that constitute fundamental justice in the state? Interestingly, there are hierarchies here, hierarchies of such rights. Some rights build on others or are means to the fulfillment of more basic rights. Pope John Paul II characterized the hierarchy as concentric circles, right, the most fundamental ones in the middle. The U.S. bishops use the analogy of the house, the foundation, the frame of the house, and we'll stick with that particular analogy. So let's talk about these basic groupings of rights that need to be protected fundamentally for a state to make any sense. The first group is what I will call fundamental natural rights. The foundation of the house, okay, is the right to life. The right to life. Or more accurately, I should probably say, the right not to be assaulted in my person by my fellow citizens, or even by the state, except under very limited circumstances that have to do with the common good. If this right is not in place for all living human beings, simply by virtue of the fact that they are human, then the logical principle at work is that everyone gets to decide who counts as a person. If I then decide that this particular person is not a human being with rights, then I get to dispatch this non-entity for my own private reasons. This is the opposite of the rule of law. Okay? It is anarchy, the powerful over the powerless. Without this right in place, there are no other rights. Then forming the frame of the house are the right to freedom of religion and conscience, and the rights of the family, that is, marriage between one man and one woman, the right to exercise the primary responsibility to care for and educate one's children, the rights of children to be properly cared for and brought up. Without the former, religion and conscience, we cannot exercise our proper abilities as human beings to act in accordance with the truth, nor properly engage in our relationship with God. Without the latter, the primary unit of the society and the place where we all learn how to be human persons is threatened. When the law fails to protect these rights fully and at all times, the state fails in its most fundamental duty, allowing or even supporting attacks on the very persons and community it exists to serve. Now, the secondary natural rights, basic civil and political rights, for instance, logically follow from the first set. Like the fundamental ones, they are not granted by the state. Rather, they precede the state and must be recognized. From the right to life and the rights of the family, we get rights to private property, to wages, to care for self and family, to a reasonable level of health care, to assistance in distress, to travel, to participate in one's own governance. Unlike the first set of rights, which can only be embodied in one way, which is completely, these rights can be embodied in a number of reasonable ways and in varying degrees. People of goodwill may well disagree about how best to bring about these ends. Nonetheless, they are trying to pursue the exact same ends through permissible means. And then finally, we have third-level rights. Okay? These are not natural rights, properly speaking, but follow from the secondary natural rights as possible means to these ends. So, for instance, from the right to travel, it might be perfectly reasonable to say I have a right to own a car if I'm old enough, if I'm able to drive it, if there are cars to be bought, and so forth. If I have the right to participate in governance, I might be able to vote or run for office if I'm old enough or to the extent that our particular method of governance allows that. Everything else, though, everything else is simply a question of useful means to bringing about reasonable and desirable ends. We may have many perfectly rational ends that we would like to see attained, but equally reasonable people may have opposing ends they would like to see brought about. They're all permissible, as long as they are in keeping with the natural law and the legal system in place. So, let's get down to it. How do we decide to vote? The easy answer is we choose candidates who embody the principles that are laid out above, okay? And decline to elect candidates who go against this vision of law, government, and the common good. Now, is it that simple? Of course not. It's way more complicated than that, always. It's hard to find anyone who will work for all the right things, right? Or at least not work against them. So our candidates may be callous to the proper sense of the common good in terms of abortion, or marriage, or conscience rights, or to what we consider the best ways to enact workers' rights, care of the environment, health care, immigration, fiscal responsibility, any number of other concerns. So how do we choose? Well, we at least know this. We have in place a hierarchy, right? I may not choose a candidate who endorses grave evils because I approve of these evils. That wouldn't make any sense at all. Okay, that would be my saying, this is a good thing, that which is bad. Okay, that would make me a bad person. But I may be in a position where I have to choose between several candidates, all of whom support something bad. Okay, and maybe even gravely wrong. Still, our hierarchy of rights gives us a roadmap for choosing correctly. Okay? I may only vote for such a candidate for proportionately grave reasons. In other words, I may only vote for a candidate who supports grave evils if the other candidates who might actually be in a position to win are worse. Okay? Nothing is worse, though, and this is very important, nothing is worse than support for the destruction of human life for private reasons. You can't get any worse than that. Okay? That attacks not only the persons, but it attacks the fundamentals of law and civil society. It's bad every way you look at it. Okay? We can't support that. Consequently, there is no proportionately grave reason for supporting such a candidate, except, perhaps, a difference of degree in their support for this assault on the person and the common good. So if one person says, I support abortion, for any reason without apology for all 9 months, that's worse than a person who says, well, I support it because, in the life of the mother situation. All right? Even there's a problem, still a grave evil. All right, but proportionately different. All right, and the other parts fit in around this. Okay, we talk about the frame of the house. The foundation is the most important thing, then the frame. So we have to go and look at conscience rights and freedom of religion. We have to look at the rights of the family, and then you start looking at the other things on the house. All right, so this is how we go about making decisions. Now, I'm obviously shortening this up, and Dr. Brady is going to talk about some other things that I didn't get a chance to get to because there's a lot of things that we have to talk about here. How do we, actually digging in and figuring out what to do in this particular case, at this particular moment. How do we think about a candidate? How do we go about looking at candidates? All right, so these, I think, are part of Dr. Brady's portion of the thing. There's a little quote from the bishops I thought might be interesting for you to look at. So I'm going to stop now, and we'll move on to number 2.
At this time, fabulous. For the record, I did all the right things as an elected official. In my own mind.
And you got my vote.
Thank you. At this time, Dr. Bernard Brady has 15 minutes.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you, Steve. I thank the Terrence Murphy Institute for the interesting, thoughtful, and timely Hot Topics program this year, as well as for the invitation to speak tonight. Monsignor Murphy was a visionary and a pragmatic leader. On several occasions over the years, I've met members of various communities, and when I have told them how long I've been at St. Thomas, they've asked, "Did Terry hire you?" To which I replied a very grateful yes. After which they would tell me some funny or interesting story about him. It's fitting that the Institute, willing to sponsor events where speakers respectfully engage one another on hot topics, is named in his honor. I begin with the fundamental idea that Catholics, like all Christians, have a faith-based moral responsibility to promote the common good of society. As the common good is understood in the Catholic tradition to be the sum total of conditions which allow people, either as groups or individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. Persons fulfill this responsibility in various ways and in various institutions. A significant way that persons fulfill this responsibility is through voting, thus the focus of tonight's conversation. This invitation from the Murphy Institute has encouraged me to think about my voting process and practices, a responsibility that I take very seriously. For the next few minutes, then, I will describe how I, a Catholic citizen of the United States, decide on whom to vote for in a particular election. I note that I'm finishing my 29th year of teaching, my 23rd at St. Thomas, and this is the first time I've ever publicly talked about how I vote. My discernment on voting can be called the 4 C's of voting. As a teacher, if I had a blackboard, I'd have C's on the board. I bring a Catholic sensibility and consciousness, I know it's 2, but I'm counting that as 1, to analyze candidates, acknowledging the particular context in hopes of achieving particular consequences. Stated again, I bring Catholic sensibility to analyze candidates given the context to achieve consequences. The first C, I bring a Catholic sensibility to the political process. Put simply, a Catholic voting sensibility I would describe as political realism inspired by Christian idealism. By realism, I mean the recognition of at least 2 things. That is, the inherent limitation of human activity and the reality of sin in life, including political life. No politician will ever be my Messiah. No political party will ever be my church. No political program can bring forth the kingdom of God. Yet I pray, your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. The kingdom I pray for is not a political realm, but at the same time, it's not apolitical. My realism then is not fatalistic, it's not deterministic, nor is it pessimistic. It is inspired by the belief that Catholic values, justice, peace, truth, freedom, love, and solidarity, can be achieved, albeit in limited ways, in all aspects of life, including political life. That belief directs my moral choices. Realism inspired by idealism can be described in a negative sense and a positive sense. That is to say, it can be described in terms of limiting or restraining evil, and it can be described in a positive sense, for example, promoting or doing the good. Pope John Paul II offers a summary of the former as he condemned, quote, whatever is opposed to life itself, such as any type of murder, genocide, abortion, euthanasia, or willful self-destruction. Whatever violates the integrity of the human person, such as mutilation, torments inflicted on the body or mind, attempts to coerce the will itself. Whatever insults human dignity, such as subhuman living conditions, arbitrary imprisonment, deportation, slavery, prostitution, the selling of women and children, as well as disgraceful working conditions, where people are treated as mere tools for profit rather than as free and responsible persons. This realism inspired by idealism acknowledges that, on one hand, we will never rid humanity of these evils, but on the other hand, we must continually make attempts to limit them. These evils must be restricted. Stated positively, this realism inspired by idealism demands that common goods be created and equitably distributed. Again, quoting the church, this requires, quote, above all, the commitment to peace, the organization of states' powers, a sound juridical system, the protection of the environment, and the provision of essential services to all, some of which at the same time are human rights: food, housing, work, education, access to culture, transportation, basic health care, the freedom of communication and expression, and the protection of religious freedom. My Catholic sensibilities require me then to limit and to overcome social evils, as well as to promote and protect common goods, so that persons, all persons, are able to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. The position I describe as realism inspired by idealism is in the spirit of thinking of two great Catholic contributors to morality and public life, St. Thomas Aquinas from the 13th century and John Courtney Murray from the 20th century. The second C refers to thinking about candidates. Here I have two more C's. We'll call them sub-C's, if you will. Character and competence. Regarding character, I have already noted that no candidate will ever be my Messiah. To this I add, I do not expect candidates to be saints, well, except for Mr. Harris. I do expect them, however, to be morally competent in their personal and public lives. It takes a person with certain basic commitments and values in life to be a good public servant. Two such values are honesty and a commitment to the common good. Both are challenges to human nature. A primary temptation of the politician, indeed to many of us, seems to be putting self-advantage and self-promotion over the truth. I think the selfishness of dishonesty on a personal level is not unrelated to issues on the public level. The means are the ends in process. If one is willing to distort the truth and to offer it exaggerated and unfounded claims as truth claims to get elected, I would expect him or her to do the same when elected. Working for the common good demands that one act on grounds other than simply self-interest or group interest. Quoting Catholic tradition, it requires the constant ability and effort to seek the good of others as though it were one's own good. I want my politicians to be competent in their roles as public servants. They must be thoughtful decision makers, they must be industrious, and have the appropriate orderliness in their actions and words. They must have a certain pragmatic side, the skill set to do the work required for the position. Character and competence are crucial because the common good is more than simply the production and equitable distribution of common goods. The common good includes, to quote Jacques Maritain, the integration of civic conscience, and quoting the church, the duty to harmonize society with the demands of social justice. Integration and harmonization take certain moral skills and practical desires, both of which point to the character and competence of the candidates. For better or for worse, because our seemingly unending campaign schedule and intense media coverage of candidates these days, we have some data to judge character and make educated guesses about competence. Here my idealism butts up against my realism, for I cannot help but to recall Dr. King's famous proclamation that we need leaders with, quote, wise judgment and sound integrity. Leaders not in love with money, but in love with justice. Leaders not in love with publicity, but in love with humanity. Modeling character and competence have positive ramifications for the community. Leaders with these characteristics inspire civic pride and unity. Dishonesty and incompetence, on the other hand, undermine civic good and breed social division. My third C in the overall process is context. The basic questions are, what office is the person running for, and what is happening in the world or the state or the city or the district that the person in that office would be charged with responding to? To use an often cited biblical phrase, what are the signs of the times? In the last general election, I voted for school board members, conservation district supervisors, that's true, sheriff, state, and national level offices, and a variety of judges. Each elected position has particular as well as general responsibilities to promote the common good. The context question focuses my Catholic sensibility. The moral problems can be overwhelming. I must ask myself, what is possible for this person in this office? There are so many social practices, referring to the Pope's categories, opposed to life, or that violate the integrity of the human person, or that insult human dignity. There is much to be done, again, according to the Church, to promote peace, to protect the environment, and to ensure that human rights of food, housing, and basic health care are met. Context helps direct choice here. A school board member can only do so much to overcome social evils and promote the goods. Here again, realism hits up against my idealism. The context question also focuses the candidate question, that is to say, the character and competence questions. What more would I look for in a candidate for judge in the 2nd District Court than character and competence? The final C refers to the consequences I hope to achieve. I vote for the common good, or better stated, I vote for people who I hope will work for the values of my Catholic sensibilities, given the context of their positions and responsibility. My vote then is an expression of confidence. Confidence is something I must have, not something I'm worried about candidates must have. There are plenty of candidates who warrant no confidence label in my book. I tire of campaign issue candidates who promote themselves on certain issues and place these issues in their ads and literature, and then forget about them when they take office. These issues, of course, magically reappear come re-election time. How a candidate feels about a certain issue is good to know. What the candidate will do about that issue is an altogether different matter. Here again, my idealism butts up against my realism. Context and timing matter, I know. But when I vote for someone, I expect some sort of action. Thus, I vote for persons who I think will be policy candidates, not merely campaign issue candidates. My realism makes me admit that this is not an either-or proposition. There is a continuum here. Fully confident in the candidate, no confidence in the candidate. I have often voted for mostly confident in a candidate. I bring my Catholic sensibility, the realism inspired by idealism, to limit evils and promote and equitably distribute goods, to analyze the candidates, particularly the character and their competence, given the context, what is happening, what office am I voting for, and to achieve consequences of policy or practice. This all adds up to another C. It all sounds so complicated. And it is, thus my concluding remarks. Catholic moral thought has long held that complicated decisions, where a number of moral principles are at stake, and where particular contingencies dictate the possible solutions, and where individual action is required but contextually bound, calls for a prudential judgment. Prudential judgment, according to Thomas Aquinas, demands discovery, observation, and taking counsel. It depends on a sense of the past, an understanding of the present, and a perception of future possibilities, educated guesses about what may or may not happen in the future, all of which I hope are captured in my 4 C's. The tradition calls this proportionate reasoning, the practice of relating abstract principles to concrete and contextually specific moral choices. Prudential thinking and proportionate reasoning take time, good counsel, and prayer. The end hoped for is a perception, a sense of seeing things with our head and our heart about what we need to do, how we need to vote in the particular situation. It also demands that we act according to our decision. Note the terminology. This is prudential judgment because the particular circumstances matter, as do an honest and thoughtful perception of what might happen. Without time, counsel, and prayer, the complexity of the situation can lead to despair. Here, fatalism wins over realism. On the other hand, without time, counsel, and prayer, the complexity of the situation may lead to an exaggerated idealism unchecked by realism. Prudential reason means a mean between these extremes. I have to admit that my process, the 4 C's, is very open to criticism. For one, it is so darn moderate, so mainstream, and so boring. You might say, Brady, where is the passion? I guess I wouldn't make a very good political candidate. My stump speech might put people to sleep. But all is not as it seems. My problem, I hope and pray, is that the underlying and moderating influences of prudential thinking, underlying the moderating influences of prudential thinking lies deep passions. I like to think that I would not be a good candidate because every stump speech would be a passionate address on a different issue. How should a Catholic vote? Feed your conscience, follow your Catholic sensibilities, Christian sensibilities to promote the common good, live your conscience, and vote as an expression of how you strive to live. Thank you.
Absolutely fabulous. Thank you, Doctor. At this time, Dr. Haney can have up to 5 minutes to respond, rumble, or rebut the comments we just heard.
Rebut would be impossible. There wasn't anything that Dr. Brady said that I disagree with. It's all very good. In fact, I almost wish that he had gone first, because I think what we got here is a way of thinking about how to go about this whole thing, where he says, look, you enter into this situation, you're going into a voting booth, you're trying to figure out, and obviously before you go into the voting booth, you have the whole season to figure out how to do that. So you're going in there with a Catholic sensibility, and you want to vote looking for a person who has the right character and is competent. So the honest, I love the part about honesty and, I wrote it down. Oddly enough, I've already forgotten. Okay, but it really impressed me at the moment. I wrote it down here. That honesty, that relationship to the truth, it seems to me, is absolutely fundamental for any candidate. Now, why I'm saying I think it would have been good if Dr. Brady had actually gone first, as it turns out, was what he said is all absolutely true, and what I'd like to think is that what I said now fills in the content. All right, so what does it mean to have that Catholic sensibility? Here's some more detail on that. How does one apply this when going into the booth? How does one appraise a candidate in terms of context and competence? So I think all I did was put in front of that more of the philosophical underpinnings for how we should be thinking about the whole process in general. But I was very pleased with what Dr. Brady had to say. I won't do that.
Go ahead.
I'm going to. No. It's all right. I'll save it. Probably someone will ask a question, then we can deal with it then. So, do you have some further thoughts?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Dr. Brady, now you may have 5 minutes to respond, rebut, or rumble with Dr. Haney's comments.
Get back here. I'm not done with you. No.
I'm coming.
I suppose my presentation was broader than yours. You were more specific on naming rights, and I would, as a point of conversation, I would organize the fundamental rights differently than you. So your argument was the basic fundamental rights are obviously the right to life, which you described primarily as the right to be of non-violation, non-interference, or not to be harmed. by others.
Not to be attacked.
Not to be
assaulted.
attacked by assault. The second right is the right of freedom of conscience, religion, and the marriage and the family. I would describe the fundamental rights differently. I would include in the right to life the right. Well, I'll give you an image, for example. Let's say a baby is born right in front of us. By your standards, by your description, the basic rights the baby had would be to be left alone from attack, right? I mean, she would be too young to choose her own religion. She'd be too young to get married. My claim would be that that baby makes fundamental moral claims on us as a society, has rights to basic nutrition, has right to basic health care, has right to clean water, has right to clean air, has right to food, I said, shelter, and right to be in thriving relationships, which is related to your third point. But I would say the right to life includes not only not being harmed, but particularly depending on the vulnerability of the person we're talking about, the right to have these goods. So that's my major response or comment to your hierarchy.
We got a minute or two to we can chat here.
Yeah.
Just the two of us. Okay. Yeah. I would say well the thing that I'm pointing to in this is what exactly are the minimum requirements of government in this regard. I wouldn't want to claim that the government is the one who has to supply all those goods. I fully agree. I mean, when the baby is born, in terms of the state has a fundamental duty to do certain things, to protect certain kinds of rights. But the baby also lodges a moral claim against us as human beings.
Yeah.
So I know I have no problem there. So right. Does the child have a right? What the child has is a right, not necessarily a right that somebody will feed it, but that no one will stop it from being fed by those who are supposed to feed it. Okay, so it goes down that line there, and which ties in with the other things, right? So what is it when we talk about marriage and the family? You know, what should the families? That's what a family is for. A family is there to supply those kinds of things, to start out that child's life, and so we have to protect that. The state has to protect that so that the family can now do its job.
And protect I know you'll agree with this, I'm sure, to protect the child even within the family context.
Yeah, even within the family, absolutely. All right.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
State sometimes needs to interfere in the family when their justice is being harmed.
Right. So
yes.
In that sense, does it fit in the category you want it to fit in? That is to say, we both would agree if there's abuse or neglect, the state has the moral responsibility to step in and care for the child in lieu of the parental responsibility.
Yes.
So that seems like it would take that right out of your primary rights, given that there's a whole division in our court system that does that.
I'm sorry, I'm missing.
Because, well, it's violated, that right literally is violated every day in the court.
Oh, yes, it happens frequently.
Yes.
It happens on both sides. It happens in the family, happens sometimes through the law. We don't want the law to be doing that.
Right. So I guess our difference is how we define rights against whom. Your conversation was about rights against the state, and I was thinking about rights in relationship to the society as a whole. When I say you have a right to food, a baby has a right to basic health care,
yes,
food,
right,
clothing, shelter. I'm saying society is the respondent to that.
Society does need to, yes, society needs to respond to that.
State of which is one part of it.
The state is society's in its governing capacity.
Right.
So insofar as we're talking about the whole, the government has to look after the common good, and so it has to protect certain basic kinds of rights and allow people to do their jobs in their individual lives.
Yeah.
So it has to open up the possibilities for people to do that job.
I'm still thinking my basic rights are different than yours, or more than yours.
We have years to converse about this.
Okay.
And I'm sure we will do that.
but I will say that the moderator has all the rights tonight. With
Dictator.
With that, I think we can move to some questions, and we've got some zingers here, so I'm looking forward to the answers. And I'll remind our participants that each individual gets 2 minutes to answer the question, and the other individual gets 2 minutes to respond to that answer if they so choose. The first question is for Dr. Haney. In 1984, why did you give Pat Harris a C in logic? Did I say that? Oh, okay. Okay. Anyways, I didn't get a C. But this
Did I
one,
plead the fifth there?
this one actually is. Please rebut that. Actually,
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I'll have to go look for my grades.
I want to know why my pothole's not been filled out.
This one is for Dr. Haney, and I will read the question. It said, "You said nothing is worse than the support for the destruction of human life. Are you thus insinuating that everyone's basis for voting is whether or not a candidate is pro-life or pro-choice? Also, who do you believe determines what is a human life, or is it only the potential for human life that matters?" Dr. Haney.
Let me start with the second question. The question of human life is a scientific question. It's fully established. Human life begins at conception, not a big deal. Now the question is, what do we do? Whom do we protect? And my claim is we have to protect all human beings, or else we're not doing our jobs. Should that be the basis for a vote? It's not the only basis for a vote, obviously. There's all these other issues that we have to talk about. But if we have a candidate in front of us who is failing in that, there's a candidate who's failing in any sort of understanding, proper understanding of what the common good is. All right? This is the claim here. This is what we're talking about here is a Catholic moral vision. Okay? What's the Catholic vision of the common good? This is the Catholic is going to say, look, if you're following the natural law, this is where you start. All right? If you're failing in this, you have a vision of the common good and a vision of the human person that is fundamentally at odds with the truth. Is this what we want to put into office? I suggest not.
Dr. Brady.
I'm trying to expand the conversation, thinking a bit differently. When I think about this, I think about not so much the law allowing abortion, which I want to talk about, but also why women have abortions, and what's the social context of that. So there's two questions here, right? The law, the permissive laws, and then the reasons why. And I'd like to see candidates from all spectrums invite that into the conversation. We've been at this for many years now, and I think it's time for an expansion of the topic.
Thank you. You can guess there's a similar topic on many of these. Dr. Brady's question now. Why should I care or not care if a local official is pro-abortion when I am pro-life? Dr. Haney would say care. How about you?
Again, if we're talking about setting up the conditions that 48% of women who have abortions live under the poverty line, another 10 or 15% live just around the poverty line. So most women who have abortions, live in these kind of conditions. If we're talking about the conversations of why people have abortion and the social conditions, again, that's different than the permissive laws. Let's take the dog catcher just to be fun, right? Or what do they call the district's conservation supervisor? The status of the abortion law, Roe v. Wade. Well, excuse me, could you speak up a little bit? Yes. And I'm having trouble thinking. Well, that's why I'm whispering, talking to myself. It has to, well, in terms of the local candidate, what's the proportion of their responsibility for national abortion laws or even state laws, right? And that's my point. And if, given it's a federal law, given it has to do with Supreme Court decisions, it doesn't bother me as much. Now, the other thing is it may come with a whole package of other ideas as well. So it has to do with proportionality of power in relationship to the law, proportionality of power in relationship to changing the social conditions which would limit the necessities, what people see necessities of abortion.
Dr. Haney, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, I think Dr. Brady's onto something here in talking about what it is that we can expect the candidate to actually do in office, right? I mean, and what does this office have to do with policies that have to do with abortion or any number of other things? So we have to ask that question. And it's perfectly reasonable, I would say, to consider a candidate in a low-level office who is not pro-life. Because we can look at that situation and say, look, there's nothing here that he's going to be able to affect in terms of life issues. That having been said, however, I think it's something that we still need to think about. It's rather surprising how much even local candidates can actually have something to say when they're in office. Okay, so you know, if you're the mayor of St. Paul or the council, you have things to say about zoning, about how the police are going to act in certain circumstances. You have things to say about that, and that might be colored by what it is that you think is the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. And on top of that, I think we should take this into account. As I said, talking about these things, talking about these fundamental issues, if you got it wrong on that, you have a fundamentally skewed idea of what the common good is all about. So unless you're simply a mere functionary, okay, that you're going to be looked at merely in terms of the competence to grind out a particular sort of job, you're going to have, it's going to play a role. If you have any kind of discretion, it's going to play a role in how it is that you lead and how it is that you rule. And so I think it's something to be taken into account, even at the lowest levels. Low-level candidates eventually move up to higher-level candidates, and they get more power and more name recognition, and is that what we want? So.
Excellent, thank you. All right, the next question is for Dr. Haney, an excellent question. Confused by common good? Easy excuse. Is it not true that 51% can form the common good? For example, tax the rich or steal for others in common good.
Read that again. I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
I'll do the one question. Is it not true that 51% can form the common good?
Oh, I see. Okay. No. 51% can decide what they think the common good is and act on it, but the common good is an objective reality. It's not a subjective situation. So you look at what you're trying to do is to figure out what the common good is and act on it. You're not deciding I'm going to make up the common good. So what we want is to put candidates into office who are going to recognize what the common good actually is and then act in that regard. And the common good is the good of the entire community. It's not necessarily the good of the individuals who are involved. Sometimes individuals don't fare as well under certain circumstances as others. But the candidate has to look at the common good. That is the good of the whole. Now, obviously, the parts that make up the whole are people, and we have to take them into account as well. But the basic idea here is look to the common good. And that is an objective reality, not something that we just make up.
Dr. Brady?
I agree with Steve on that. Majority rules doesn't make the common good. Often because the majority rules can be the detriment to the minority. And the first part of that question is an interesting one too, because the common good demands action by citizens, and it does unfortunately demand taxes and other forms of social responsibility. The common good is not met when 50 million people don't have health insurance. The common good is not met when 36 million people live in poverty in the United States. It's a complex way to think about organizing society. But it's not majority rule. That's Steve's point. Yeah.
Okay, our next question is to Dr. Brady. Would you rather have a morally incompetent, this is a good, interesting one. Not sure which one I was. Would you rather have a morally incompetent but politically competent politician, or vice versa?
I'm glad that's your question.
If we describe morality only in terms of the personal realm, I suppose there are some immoral qualities that don't translate so much into the public realm. Europeans, I suppose, laugh at us for our concern about our politicians and their private sex lives. I hear Europeans laugh at that. Other questions about honesty, I think, integrity. It's like they're both public and private. It's like if you're lying in one part of your life, you're probably lying in the other part of your life. So maybe we can make that divide. I'm not so comfortable with that, but maybe I would make that divide. Could be competent politically, but maybe not be the best husband, I suppose, versus politically competent and lying to citizens.
Turning it over to me now?
Yeah.
Ah, jeez.
Just
Morally, I don't think, properly speaking, you're going to have a person who is one or the other. And I think this is part of what you're getting at here. I mean, human beings fail all the time. But in that regard, every human being is morally incompetent. All right, we're always failing. But when we have a person whose moral failings indicate that he is detached from the truth of things, then we have something else entirely. And a person who is detached from the truth of things is a person who is also going to be politically incompetent. He might be very skilled at being a politician, but he's not going to be good as a ruler, as a leader, as someone who's going to show us the way and make the right kinds of rules. So I would tend to think it's going to be very hard to come up with someone who's morally incompetent and politically competent, properly understood.
Excellent. Okay, Dr. Haney, what would you say to those who accuse Catholics of one-issue voting? How do we defend against this?
Well, that quote right there, that's still up there on the screen, sorry, I never did take that down, should indicate to us that we're not one-issue people at all. We can't possibly be one-issue people. Everything has to do with the common good in some way. We just have to figure out what the relationships are and what the hierarchies are. Is being a person who says, look, I'm not voting for candidates who support abortion on demand. I can't do that. Is that single issue? I would say that's not a single issue. I would call it a singular issue. It's an extraordinary kind of issue. It's an issue that doesn't have an equal. And so it makes sense to be single-issue voters if that's what you mean by it. Catholics have been single-issue voters for as long as there have been voters. My parents grew up in the era of the civil rights movement, and everything that they ever talked about in terms of politics was about that. Were they single-issue voters? Yeah, I guess they were, but proudly so, because they would never say, well, here's a guy who's for racism. Let's vote for him. I mean, they're not going there. But there's all sorts of issues. It's just a question of putting them in hierarchies.
Dr. Brady.
If the bishops would have me, I'd go to their annual meeting and close the doors. And I say, okay, guys, listen up. It looks like you're leaning way too far for one of the political groups right now. And the other group's not doing too bad in some things. The group you're with is doing some things we don't approve of either. So why don't you decide amongst yourselves? Not asking to change your moral view. Decide amongst yourselves which of you might sound like you're more supporting the Democrats and which of you might sound like you're more supporting Republicans, and then hold them to it. Then hold them to it. The abortion debate has been going on too long without any change. This is my tacit little thing about people who run on issues and don't seem to do much about it. And emotions get involved and sides get alienated. I think they should take straws and decide they're going to promote the or parts of the Affordable Health Care Act because it gives health care to people and it has all these good things going for it, and then hold the task on the other issues. And I think it would be good for the church, and I think it would be good for society.
Excellent. Got time for more, Ms. Sullivan? One more. A final question to Dr. Brady. Well, actually, this other question that someone put forward said, why can't we all just get along? I would agree with that, and particularly in today's society and our own legislature. Dr. Brady, would you vote for a candidate whose politics essentially go against the common good but follow your personal views?
I'd love to be able to say I just vote for the common good all the time. I love just to do that, you know. I really hope, I mean, I say that jokingly, but I really take it seriously, and I hope my views are aligned with the sense of the common good. So for me, it's a question of integrity of who I am. So I mean, I hope I do that.
Yeah, I'm baffled by the question. I'm not sure what that would mean to say, here's my vision of the common good. Now I'm going to ignore that in favor of what personal thing? I don't know. Maybe if we talk about self-interest or something like that, yeah. I would think, given what we both said here, that neither of us are thinking in terms of self-interest at all. That's our personal view.
See, we all can get along.
Yes.
That was well done. That was
right. So thank you very much.
Oh, we are done, aren't we?
On that very cordial handshake note, I will turn it over to Ms.
Say thank you, everybody, for coming tonight and for kind of capping off the series, and especially to our speakers who put so much time and thought into these presentations tonight, and really their life work, actually. We have a small token of appreciation for you. You're Tommies, so this isn't asking too much, but we want you to wear some purple here. Take your ties off. Go golfing now. Celebrate. Oh. This one is, well, I've got the same one for each of you. I have something a little different for Patrick. I hope this fits.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean.
Patrick and his wife are expecting a baby any day now. I've got something for the rest of them, too. Thank you very much, Patrick. It was fun doing this with you. I hope there are refreshments out there. I haven't checked. I don't smell them, but they're supposed to be. Please help yourself and carry on. Oh, there are. Okay. Well, you're welcome to those and coffee. And the Murphy Institute will fire this series up again next fall. We're going to focus on religious liberty issues. And if you'd like to be on our mailing list, please sign up. There's a piece of paper out there. Give me your email address. I'll make sure you get notice of our next event. Thank you.